but Trump's still going to win it. And I think it's going to be by more than 5. Oklahoma will be going to Donald Trump. Texas will be going to Donald Trump. Very, very big state. Liberals, they've been trying to flip it. However, it looks like Trump is expanding the margin that he won in 2020 by. He won by about 5.8. It looks like he might win by about 7 or 8, which is huge considering the migration to Texas by liberals from expensive states like California and New York. Obviously, Alaska will be going to Trump. We'll see what the margin is. The margin might be surprisingly close, maybe 8 or 9. I mean, I think it was 10 in 2020. Maybe it'll get exaggerated out to 12 or 13, who knows. Hawaii will be going to Kamala. She will also be taking Colorado. When it comes to Colorado, it was almost a swing state back in 2016. You've seen a ton of liberals come to the state. I think it's going to be at least a 12 or a 13-point win for Harris, honestly. Utah will be going to Donald Trump. We will leave New Mexico blank. That is a state that Donald Trump visited on Halloween, so there is some potential wiggle room there. I'm going to expand and give more of an in-depth thought on that. When it comes to it, Louisiana, Trump's going to win very easily. Arkansas, Trump's going to win very easily. Mississippi, Donald Trump will win very easily. Missouri, I think that, the Senate race, a little bit competitive. Holly should win pretty easily. Trump's going to win. Iowa, Donald Trump should win by, I would say, at least 8 or 9 points. We're going to leave Minnesota blank. We're going to leave Wisconsin blank. We do have Illinois, which Kamala Harris will win, possibly by around 11 or 12, I would say, maybe a little bit more than that, but it will be a tighter margin, just like a lot of these liberal states in 2024 than it was in 2020. That's why we're seeing the popular vote potentially shift to Donald Trump, and it's basically even in terms of that. You're talking about Kentucky, that's a state that Donald Trump will very easily win. Tennessee, Trump will easily win. Alabama, Trump will easily win. Florida is another state. 2020, it was a swing state. Now it's not. Donald Trump, the clear favorite in Florida. The only question is, what will the margin be? I'm thinking it's around at least 8 or 9 points. You look at the early voting indicators. You look at the voter registration with Republicans having about a 7 to an 8 point advantage, and the independents, like we saw in 2016 and 2020, going for Trump in the state of Florida. I'm guessing Trump wins the state by a significant margin. There's a lot of people that still think it's going to be relatively close. It very likely will not be. There's been a polling change there recently as well to where Trump is becoming an even bigger favorite, and I don't think they're polling the state in terms of their sample properly. I think Trump's going to overperform the polls, even though they already say he's going to win by about 7.5 to 8 points. He'll probably end up winning by about 10 or 11. We're going to leave Georgia blank. We do have South Carolina going to Donald Trump. We're going to leave North Carolina and Virginia blank. We do have West Virginia going to Trump. We do have Ohio going to Trump. There was an interesting poll that I saw. There's rumors of an Ohio Trump +3. It's absolutely ridiculous. Donald Trump won Ohio in a much worse environment in 2020 by 8 points. It's not apples to apples in terms of, maybe there are states that swing to the left, but Trump going from a +8 to a +3 in 2024 in a much better environment, more favorable conditions for him. It's just ridiculous. He's been up in most of the polls in Ohio by around 6 to 7 points. I think he's going to end up winning Ohio by a bigger margin than he did in 2016 or 2020, potentially by about 9 to 9.5 points, which would also help the Senate race with Bernie Moreno there. We do have Indiana going to Donald Trump. Indiana, normally one of the first states to be called, leaving Wisconsin blank, leaving Michigan blank, leaving Pennsylvania blank. You do have New York, which is a state that some Republicans have talked about possibly, is it a swing state? Could it potentially happen? It's not going to happen. I think it's going to be about a 13-point victory for Harris in New York. That's a significant cut. We saw Biden win by 23. It goes down to 13, but it's not going to be a Trump victory, and I don't think it'll be within single-digit range. Moving on to New Hampshire, that's another state I'll leave blank right now. It's kind of turned into a swing state. You do have Vermont, obviously going to Kamala Harris, Connecticut going to Kamala Harris, New Jersey, which might be under 10. It's something I'm watching. Biden won it by about 20, but it's going to be cut significantly. Both New Jersey and New York are two states I think Trump's going to make up big ground when it comes to the popular vote. Not that the popular vote matters a ton, but it is something if you are the Republicans, considering how many times you've lost it, you would like to get that. You do also have Delaware, which Kamala Harris will win, Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, as well as Massachusetts, all very obvious states that Kamala Harris will win. When you're talking about Maine, the Maine at-large is interesting. I do want to talk about it. I do think, though, you can argue, is it a swing state, is it not? There's just no polling, or there's very little polling in Maine. There was some very interesting polling. It was like a student survey, but it was very accurate in the previous 2 cycles, and it had Trump up by 8. I'm not saying Trump's going to win Maine at-large by 8. It's a state he lost in 2020. but I think that it's probably going to be closer than people think just because there's very limited polling out of Maine in general. When it comes to the first district, that is a lock for Kamala Harris. When it comes to the second district, it will very likely go to Trump. The first district's more of a lock for Harris than the second district is for Trump, but that's very likely how those electoral votes end up getting split. I'm also going to do the other electoral vote, the second district in Nebraska. It is very likely to go to Kamala Harris, possibly by 7 or 8 points, believe it or not. That is the Omaha region, the Omaha area, and it's just a small populated area. Obviously, considering it's just one district, and Harris, it seems the district swung more left in terms of the population. So she will win that, or I would expect her to win that. But now we're going to go through all of the swing states. Some of these are fringe, some of these are actual swing states, but we're going to go here and give my official prediction. When it comes to Nevada, I do think Donald Trump will very slightly win Nevada, possibly winning by less than a point. It might be the closest major swing state out of the 7 that the media talks about. But Donald Trump, I would expect, based off of polling, based off of even recent history, we saw Republicans make up ground in 2020, only lose by 2.5. And we saw relatively good polls in terms of their accuracy in 2020. Well, now the polls say Donald Trump's up by around 1. We've seen polls like the Atlas poll where Trump's up by 4. Nevada is trending to Trump. There was great early vote numbers in Clark County. Republicans maintain those good early vote numbers as we're heading into election day where they've got an advantage. I think Trump narrowly wins Nevada. It is only 6 electoral votes. It would be the least important major swing state out of the 7, but I do think Donald Trump wins that state there. It's going to be very close. This is the one you could argue it's about 50-50 right now. I mean, you could argue several of them are 50-50, but Nevada, it's hard to get a total read on. I am giving it to Donald Trump. Moving on to Arizona, that is another state I think Donald Trump will win by a little bit bigger of a margin than Nevada. I'm thinking around 3.5 points, which could potentially help Kari Lake win by maybe a half a point when it comes to the Senate. But when it comes to Arizona, Donald Trump is up in all the polls. He's the favorite at this point. He's been the favorite, I would say, for 2 months now. It seems like liberals have given up Arizona within the past month to month and a half, and it does feel very, very likely that Donald Trump will take that state. You compare the Arizona polls, they underperformed Trump. I think they underpolled Trump back in 2020 very slightly. Well, now they've got Trump up by about 1.5, and he's up in basically all of them. I think Arizona will be going to Trump. It feels like the Harris campaign has given up Arizona, and to some degree Nevada as well, as they're focused more on maybe a North Carolina along with the Rust Belt. I think Donald Trump ends up winning Arizona. Now, when it comes to New Mexico, that is a state that I do think Kamala Harris is able to hold on to, possibly by around 4 or 5 points. I do think it might be closer than people expect. It's a border state. I think Trump's going to do better. I think Trump having the rally on Halloween there, that's going to help a little bit. But overall, I don't think it's going to be enough to make up the difference. And you do have some people concerned, why go to New Mexico? Go out of your way there. Doesn't really make sense. Their internal polls must be a lot better. I saw Rasmussen, Harris +5. I've seen other New Mexico polls. They've all been around 5 or 6 point leads for Kamala. I think she ends up holding the state when it comes to that. I just can't do it. When it comes to Minnesota, Minnesota could be a surprisingly close state. I do think Kamala Harris ends up hanging on to Minnesota, probably by around 4 points would be my guess, maybe 5 points. It's a state that will get closer for sure. It was swing state back in 2016. It was a 1 point difference. And honestly, it wouldn't totally shock me if it went to Trump. It's like one of those extra swing states. It's like we think Virginia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire is the extra swing states. But I do think Kamala Harris is able to hold on to Minnesota and win that possibly by around a 3 or a 4 point margin when it comes to that. Now, looking at Georgia, this is another state I think Donald Trump wins. I don't want to say comfortably, but I think it's going to be around 3.5 to 4 point victory there. We've got very accurate polls out of Georgia. The Georgia polls have been accurate in the past 2 Trump cycles, and they've got Trump sitting right around +3 in terms of the aggregate. Trump looks very good right now in Georgia and Arizona. It would be extremely surprising at this point if he lost either of those states. And that's why I think the Harris campaign is mainly shifted, and you're seeing a bigger narrative talking about her sweeping the Rust Belt or potentially also taking a North Carolina, although it's mainly based around the Rust Belt. When you look at North Carolina, it is another state I do think Donald Trump will win. Donald Trump won the state in 2020 and 2016 under much worse conditions, especially in 2020. He only won it by 1.3. It was closer. It was 2 points closer than 2016, and that's what they'll argue. It got closer. Why can't it flip now? And I do think the state is getting slightly more liberal when you talk about the migration into it from the more expensive states that people are moving out of, like a New York down to North Carolina. But I think Trump will be able to usurp that because of his popularity improving over the last 4 years. There's a ton of nostalgia when it comes to Trump when you look at his approval rating and what people think it is now back, based off of the 4 years when he was in power. And I think if Trump's able to win this state in 2016 and 2020, even with potentially more liberals now being in the state over the last 4 years, it's not going to make up for the Trump gaining more popularity after already winning the state in 2016 and 2020, even though it got closer by 2 points. I think it'll probably be a 2.5 to a 3-point victory. He won it in 2016 by 3 points. He won it in 2020 by 1 point. I think it goes back up to about 2.5-point victory in North Carolina for Donald Trump there. So that would put Donald Trump at 268, and that's the entire liberal argument at this point. And this is what I think the path for Harris would be. It would be Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But we will be taking a look at Virginia. And when it comes to Virginia, I just can't do it. I really can't. I think it's going to be very close. People mainly expect it to be relatively close. Now, some people think it'll be 5 or 6 points. I think it could be about 3.5 to 4 in Virginia, very similar to Minnesota. Those are kind of the two states where it's like, which one is more conservative? Past history would say Minnesota, but you've got the Youngkin factor in 2021, and he didn't visit Minnesota, but he's visiting Virginia. So that could tell you that the Trump campaign obviously thinks their polls are more favorable in Virginia than in Minnesota. So I think Virginia, he's having a rally there today. It's going to be very close. I don't know if Trump can get over, losing the state by whatever it was, 8 or 9 points. That's a lot to make up in Virginia, but it's going to be very, very close, and there will be significant dialogue about it becoming a swing state potentially in 2028. It was a very, very close state in 2016. Biden extended the lead significantly, and I think it'll be extremely close again, but I cannot right now predict it for Trump. Although it wouldn't be shocking at all if Trump won the state. I mean, if Trump won this state or we were getting really good numbers, by 11 or 12 o'clock at night, you're talking about a very easy Trump victory. Virginia is going to tell a lot of signs when it comes to that. Moving on to New Hampshire, it's another state right now. I just cannot do it. I have to give it to Harris. It's going to be very close. There are a ton of independents in New Hampshire, but I do think Harris very narrowly takes the state, possibly by only 2 or 3 points. Maybe it's even closer, but I do think a lot of those independents are lean slightly to the left. It's surprising that Trump did not visit New Hampshire based on the polls, especially when you compare them to New Mexico. I mean, New Hampshire and New Mexico are only 1 electoral vote difference. You'd think New Hampshire, the polls are, I would say, about 3 or 4 points better than New Mexico, but we only have the public polling. We don't have the internals. So maybe the internals are a lot worse in New Hampshire than the public polling. There's been a few polls recently that have been very close. There was one poll that had Trump up by about 0.5 point. It wasn't admitted into the Real Clear Politics aggregate. But you've also got a Rasmussen Harris +1. You had another Harris +3. These are within the margin. It's possible. I'm looking at Virginia and I'm looking at New Hampshire. Those would be the two states to where if Trump can win them, you do not need any of the Rust Belt. Trump's at 268 right now. That's why there was a huge argument to make Nebraska winner take all. So obviously it's just 5 electoral votes. Trump's guaranteed to win Nebraska at large, and he'd be at 269, so he'd at least tie. But this is why Trump is trying to extend that map, maybe take a Virginia to where you're at the margin already without any of the Rust Belt states. Now, when it comes to the Rust Belt, I've seen a lot of people split up the Rust Belt. They've got Michigan going one way, they've got Wisconsin and Pennsylvania going the other way, or they've got Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin and Michigan going one way and Pennsylvania going the other way. When it comes to Pennsylvania, it is widely thought that Pennsylvania is, by a very slight margin, with these 3 Rust Belt states, they're all going to be very, very close in terms of the margin. Pennsylvania is thought to be the most Republican out of the 3. So, and that's not a guarantee, by the way. I've seen a lot of people say maybe Pennsylvania goes left, Wisconsin goes right. But when it comes to all of the polls, the recent data we've had in the past elections, we do think Pennsylvania will go to Donald Trump very slightly. And I do think Pennsylvania will be the state. And it's those 3 states. It's Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. We can talk about Virginia. We could talk about, some of the other states in the Sun Belt, and Nevada and Arizona, but it's those 3 states, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia. I was talking about this 2 months ago. Those are the 3 states that's going to win Donald Trump this election. And I think Pennsylvania, with all of the work that's been put into there, and it's really, this is more so like a storybook ending here. Donald Trump nearly gets assassinated in Pennsylvania. He probably should have. The only reason he's alive is because he barely turned his head. He goes back to PA in Butler in a rural place, draws over 100,000, brings Elon Musk there. It is one of the more epic moments we've seen on a campaign trail really ever in American history. And how about that being the state that clinches it for Donald Trump? That would really be a storybook ending when it comes to this cycle. And I do think that will be the state that Donald Trump will win. And I'm guessing it's probably going to surprise some people. I think it'll be around 2, possibly over 2 points in terms of a Trump victory. Trump right now is leading the polls in Pennsylvania. Now we'll see. There might be a few more updates. Maybe he'll end up going slightly down. But right now I think he's up by 0.3 or 0.4. And I do think Pennsylvania is the state that pushes Donald Trump over. When it comes to Wisconsin and Michigan, I would say Wisconsin is more conservative than Michigan. I do think that is a pretty common belief. That's, nothing crazy or anything like that. I do think Donald Trump will also take Wisconsin. Now, the thing with Wisconsin is I had just kind of an inclination that Wisconsin was going to be more conservative this cycle than Pennsylvania. The polling wouldn't necessarily suggest it, although we're talking about very close margins. Right now, I think Harris is up by around 0.2 in the polls in Wisconsin, and a lot of that might be because of that CNN +6 poll, or was that poll in Michigan? I'm not sure. But either way, I do think Wisconsin is another state I would feel more confident in Donald Trump winning than a Michigan. To me, Michigan is the one state where you're right now teetering. You're getting some Harris polls. There was a bigger narrative the past 2 or 3 months outside of like the past 2 or 3 weeks where Trump went ahead and then recently Harris has taken the lead back. But throughout the entire summer, going into the fall, it was Michigan. Harris is leading all the polls. She's looking better there. Wisconsin is a very, very, very slight lean to Harris that turned to a Trump lean. And then Pennsylvania was the more Republican state. To me, it seems like Pennsylvania is the easiest one for Trump to win, which is the most important because it's 19 electoral votes. Then it would be a Wisconsin. Then it would be a Michigan. And when it comes to Michigan, to me, it is a pure toss-up. I am going to give Donald Trump Michigan as well. The Rust Belt states, I'll say this, it wouldn't shock me if the Rust Belt states split just because the margins are so thin, but I do think Donald Trump will also take Michigan. I've had Trump at 312 for 2 months now, and it's not necessarily, I'm just married to the prediction. It's like if I've got him at 312, 312, 312, 312, yes, Trump's made up some ground in Virginia. He's having a rally there. He's made up some ground in New Hampshire. People are talking about it now. Those would be the 2 states, maybe a Minnesota, but mainly those 2 states is what I'm looking at for potentially Trump to expand the math. And yes, it was a little bit tempting to potentially give Kamala Harris Michigan and split up the Rust Belt, but I'm not going to do that. To me, it's about 50-50 in Michigan, and I think Trump ends up winning Michigan. There's going to be a little bit of help from Jill Stein, maybe 1 point, whatever. We saw in 2016, Trump very narrowly win Michigan by 0.3. He lost it by about 2 in 2020. I think it's undoubtedly slightly more liberal than the other 2 Rust Belt states, but I do think Donald Trump ends up winning when it comes to that state, possibly by around 0.3 or 0.4. I'm guessing Michigan, Nevada are the 2 closest states. You could even be talking about Michigan being closer than Nevada. Trump might win Nevada by around 1 point to 1.5 points based off of some of those early voting numbers, and also some of the polls we've seen where Trump's up by 3 or 4, but it's just a hard state to get a read on. It is purely an independent state at this point. But what I would say right now, you're looking at Arizona and Georgia. I've got those 2 states going to Trump by slightly more margins, by slightly higher margins than any of the other swing states. I'm liking Arizona and Georgia by around 3 to 3.5 points. There are people that say North Carolina might be easier than Georgia and Arizona based off of the polling right now. And I understand Trump won North Carolina. He lost Georgia. There's a lot that went into that. When you look at the early voting with the minority vote kind of lagging behind, that's great news for Trump in a state like Georgia. I think Georgia is going to be a higher margin than North Carolina, possibly by about 1.5 points. And I think Arizona will be as well. And then it comes down to a Pennsylvania, right? Because if you get all the Sun Belt states, even if you lose in Nevada, you win Pennsylvania, it doesn't matter. So it comes down to those 3. It's a Pennsylvania, it's a North Carolina, it's a Georgia. You win those 3, nothing else really matters. Worst case scenario, you lose all 3 of these Rust Belt states. You take a New Hampshire by a hair. You take a Virginia by a hair. You win with either one of those states. If you win New Hampshire, you lose all the Rust Belt. You're at 272. But that's as long as you win Nevada. So then Nevada starts becoming very important. If you end up losing all 3 of the Rust Belts, if you don't take Nevada and you lose the Rust Belt, you would have to take Virginia. So there's some different math when it comes into this. Also, another state potentially you're watching is the Maine at large. There's just very limited polling for Maine at large, and Biden won it by a decent margin, so it's hard to predict it to go to Trump. There's just like a few straw polls, whatever. It's just, to me, I just cannot do it at this point when looking at all of the polling. I would still have to say Harris slightly wins it, but that's potentially 2 electoral votes Trump could pick off. When it comes to Harris expanding her math, liberals tried to I think the only state they really argued was Florida. Like, that's the only one. Like, because Florida's always been seen coming into the cycle as a Republican heavy lean. There's been some liberals that say maybe it might happen. It's obviously not going to happen. I think they've given it up. They've really got nowhere to go when it comes to them potentially expanding their math. They've got no shot in Texas. Again, it's probably going to be by a higher margin, about 7.5 at least. Florida, I think, will probably be 9, 10, 11. So they're just trying to hold on to the Minnesotas, to the Virginias, to the New Hampshires, and then go for broke in the Rust Belt, and then possibly try and add a combination of maybe a Nevada and a North Carolina. I don't believe they think they can really win Arizona or Georgia at this point. It's more so fully Rust Belt. Maybe you also take a Nevada. That could give you wiggle room if you lose a New Hampshire. That would be my guess when it comes to the liberal strategy at this point. But it is 312. It's the golden number this cycle for Donald Trump. It's what a lot of people have been predicting. And again, I did think about maybe switching Michigan, maybe switching a New Hampshire, being cute, Virginia, but I just cannot do it at this point. I'm just going to stick with my prediction, 312 to 226. Donald Trump did win in 2016 with 306 electoral votes. He won all the swing states I have here outside of Nevada. That went to Hillary Clinton back in 2016. But that is my final prediction, guys. And when it comes to the popular vote, it's very hard to gauge the popular vote. This is what I'll say about the popular vote. So right now, in terms of the Real Clear Politics average, Trump is sitting plus 0.3. That's to this minute. Now, maybe it'll change in an hour. We'll have to see, because there are some polls that potentially could get knocked off of the aggregate that Trump is up by 2 or 3. And so if those polls get knocked off, maybe Harris ends up leading in that. I really want to predict Trump to win the popular vote. I don't know if I can do it based off some of the recent polling I've seen in some of these liberal states. It might not be as crazy as a surge that I originally thought in a North Carolina or a New Jersey that could really help Trump win the popular vote. I think the popular vote either way will be decided within a point, whether Harris wins it by 0.5 or Trump wins it by 0.5. Right now, I'm going to say Trump very narrowly wins the popular vote, possibly by around 0.3 to 0.4. Which is roughly the Real Clear Politics average. However, that might change. But the popular vote, I will note, Harris is a pretty heavy favorite right now in terms of the betting. And it got down to about 60-40, but now it's back up to around 63-37. I think there's a big dynamic where people just don't think a Republican can win the popular vote based off of the previous cycles we've seen. And it's very hard for them. But I do think this is the moment where Trump can win the popular vote. And you get him over the finish line by around half a point, maybe by 0.7, whatever it ends up being. I think it's going to be decided within a point either way, which should help Trump, by the way. However, one of the things I'll warn, and this is what I've seen people, they've been comparing it to 2020, and they've been saying, well, Trump nearly won, and he could have won the Electoral College while losing the popular vote by 4 points. That's extremely unlikely again. And I'd say even 3 points. If Trump loses the popular vote by 3 points, I think he probably loses the Electoral College as well, because the electoral math has changed in terms of a lot of these liberal states getting more conservative. Now, Trump's not going to flip those states, but they are getting more conservative, so Trump's going to do better in terms of the popular vote. That's why you're starting to see liberals say, listen, Harris could actually lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College. And the way that would work is Trump taking all the Sun Belt states and running up decent margins in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, winning Florida by 11 or 12, winning Texas by 7 or 8, cutting down the margin in a Michigan, cutting down the margin, in a New York, cutting down the margin in a New Jersey, cutting down the margin in a California, and then Harris takes the 3 Rust Belts by like 0.2 or extremely close margins and wins with 270. I don't think that's really possible. I don't think she can win the Electoral College while losing the popular vote, but that would be the scenario. It would be 270 to 268 with her winning by absurdly close margins in the Rust Belt. Either way, I do think right now I would say Trump 312 winning the popular vote by around a half a point, something around there. But guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.